maybe before we get started, it's always helpful to me to take just a couple of minutes to sort of quiet my mind and arrive, both in a virtual room and a live room. So let's just all take a couple of minutes to just quiet our minds, leave behind the workday or whatever we've been doing. And focusing our attention on our breath. And if your mind wanders, just gently bring it back to your breath. And now when you feel calm and present, bring to mind the reason that you're here tonight, the reason you joined this class. And then try to tap into the highest motivation you have, even if it seems sort of lofty. If in your mind there's a desire to help every living being, that's really a wonderful motivation. And just consider for a moment all the different things you could be doing tonight, but there is some kind of goodness that made you want to be here to participate in this class. And just try to connect with that. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And I'm going to try to figure out how I need to put my head so that I don't get a glare from my glasses. I still haven't figured that one out. So welcome, everyone, and Happy New Year. There's a couple of familiar faces, but I'd love, if you're comfortable, if everyone wants to maybe actually raise your hand if you want to do introductions, or if you'd rather just go anonymously forward. Thank you. So Donnie, am I pronouncing that? I'm pronouncing it correctly, right?
It's either or. Danny, Donnie, doesn't matter to me. Whatever you feel comfortable with. What do you want me to say?
Pardon?
What do you want me to say?
Just a brief introduction, kind of why you're here, or what your interest is in, or how long you've been practicing.
Okay. I've had a real connection with this group during the pandemic. And so I've been following all sorts of classes that they give. And yeah, and I made a bunch of friends here, Shayla, etc. So yeah. All right.
Nice. Thank you. Thanks so much. So Shayla, since, oh, Leslie, you're unmuted.
Hi, I'm Leslie.
Hey.
How are you?
Great. Thank you. Happy New Year.
New Year. Yes. I have been familiar with Buddhism for a while. My husband's practiced it more than I have. But I just felt like I just wanted to get a little bit more centered. Nice. And you guys have a lot of classes that you offer. I've been looking around online and it fits my times and there's a lot of different offerings. So
great. Well, welcome.
Thank you. It's my dog. She's like trying to make all sorts of noise.
I'm Shayla. Sorry. And I'm from Utah. The reason why I attend this class is I like the tips and tools to bring the Dharma into my every single day life. It helps me because sitting in classes all day long listening to a couple 1,000-year-old texts doesn't actually put it in modern day usage. So these do help. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And Janice, I don't think we've met. If you're not comfortable to introduce yourself, that's okay. But if you don't mind.
My name's Michael. In fact, I live right down the street from Bonnie, apparently. Although I don't know how many streets it is, but it's not very far away. And I work in the field of addiction, and I do this for two reasons. Number one is for myself, because of my own personal background, and I have a long family history of depression and anxiety and other kinds of problems. And then also, though, I get lots of tips and tricks for how to apply these things to people at work. So I do it for both reasons, and I just love being in these classes, and Bonnie is a great instructor.
Thank you so much, Michael. And Janice?
I'm sort of new to this, so I believe in lifelong learning, and especially things that you can apply to your daily life. So thank you for offering this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. So, Michael, it's really interesting when you were talking about how you use these classes for like in your job, like in life. And I think a couple of people mentioned that, that's the purpose. And I was actually having dinner last night with some friends, and one of them had been in Dharmasala like 50 years ago when His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, taught some of the first Western students. And they had a meeting, and I said, well, what did he teach? And they said he really just wanted to hear from them, what they were doing, how the teachings had affected them. And they said it was just so inspiring to hear, people who were in, whether social work or psychology or, medical, a range of different things, and how they had actually brought the teachings into their life and into the world in a really practical way. And they were just saying how pleased he was to kind of hear that. And even as we're talking about it, we're all having a conversation and getting a little bit choked up because it's, that's really what it's here for. So, not just for some academic purpose, these teachings are, to bring into our lives and to enrich our lives, both in a short-term sort of way, but also ultimately to really put us in a position where we are so familiar with our own minds, and our own minds are trained so well that we can actually really be there to help other beings. And, this class, it's sort of like a free-for-all, because honestly, being your own therapist is 100% what Buddhism is all about. So we could take lots of different tacks, different directions, kind of looking at this in multiple ways. So I thought, one of the things I'd like to talk a little bit about today is, what it means to be a Buddhist, what it means to take refuge. I thought that might be interesting. And then, how and why that can actually help us in our lives. But I also thought before then, ideally, if we were all sitting in a room together, it'd be so much more natural in a way to kind of have Did I see? You can't hear me.
I said no. Some of us don't want to be in the room together. But anyway, I'm just giving you a hard time. I'm breaking you in, Chief.
Well, you know, Buddhism, lots of introspective sort of people come to the Dharma, right? So in some weird way, like the Zoom is sort of ideal, you know, from the comfort of our homes. It's like from our meditation caves, right? But then eventually we have to come out and like face the world. But I thought, you know, if anybody had anything kind of specific that they would like to talk about, you know, I just wanted to have something in my mind that we could kind of talk about and share. And that was where I came up with the idea of like discussing refuge. But I'd really love if anyone has something that they're very interested in, or a problem that they have, or I don't know, something like that, to kind of give us something personal maybe to discuss. Leslie, I see you're off mute.
So I mean, I'll be honest, since this is kind of a closed group. Like I have recently been going through a divorce and became highly anxious with it, and realized in that time period, because I had to go to a facility to help regulate my emotions and everything, was diagnosed with borderline at the time. And Marsha Linehan is a huge proponent of, I don't know if anybody's heard of her, but she's a huge proponent of dialectical behavior training, and she incorporates mindfulness. And like, she went and trained in Germany with some Buddhism and stuff. So what I actually really would like to do is to learn to be more in like the present moment, instead of worrying about, you know, the anxiety for the future or the depression from the past. So that's kind of what I would like to really send. That's why I'm being centered. So
and that, I mean, that really is why we're here. Yeah. And you know, it was very brief, but just those couple of minutes of quiet at the beginning of class, you know, the idea there is to arrive in the now. You know, that is the mindfulness. It's like center, you know, starting on your breath. It's not a meditation in and of itself, but it's a way of kind of putting our minds into kind of neutral and arriving. And, you know, I've said this before, looking in the present moment, you know, anxiety, it's so challenging. But if you look, and you already spoke to it, anxiety comes from either propelling ourselves into the future, or, you know, going back to the past. Like in the moment, you know, I Buddhism is really an experimental system, right? Where, you know, you hear these teachings and these methods, and then you go and try it yourself. But I really challenge people, when you're feeling that kind of anxiety, and non-Buddhist, you know, doctors, people will say, stop, count to 10, watch your breath. They say there's a connection between breath and your mind, that actually the mind rides on the winds. So kind of rides on your breath. And that's why you can feel when you're anxious or afraid, your breathing changes, right? The speed of it changes. So just slowing down and getting in touch with that and stopping that, it actually has an effect on your mind as well. And I challenge, you know, when you do that, just see if you don't feel instantly better. And then when you start to feel anxious again, like watch what your breath is doing, you know, and watch where your mind is, and ask yourself, am I here? And then try to get here in this moment. Because in this moment, there's a very finite amount of suffering or unpleasantness or even pleasantness that can happen in a moment. Right? So kind of like just getting here and being more mindful of that can be really, really helpful. The other thing that's helpful is sometimes watching, so maybe sometimes letting what I'll call a crazy train, kind of letting the crazy train run, but not hopping on board. So, you know, just kind of observing, what is my mind just going to? and trying to, it's a little challenging at first, but you'll find you're able to be in that kind of watcher role where you're not engaging in the thoughts, you're just kind of watching them pass. And then later you can sort of think about like, why was my mind, why does my mind go in that direction? You can do more of an analytical meditation, or you can meditate on an antidote for something, right? So if you're feeling anger, for example, patience is the antidote to anger. So having a moment of anger, it doesn't make, the other thing that's nice, it's nice to know that all these mental afflictions, and I'm going to look at this in a second, but all of these mental afflictions that we have are so incredibly normal. And so getting rid of like the judging mind, we have had countless, according to Buddhism, we've had countless lifetimes. We've been everything. We've done everything. So there's no reason to feel kind of shame or, just feeling bad about ourselves, low self-esteem because we have these mental afflictions. It's actually something that everyone has. We've all had them, and worse. And really, focusing on being here now, the fact that you're doing something to try to like change that, and create some kind of positive momentum in your life, that's something to feel really good about and rejoicing. So I don't know if that's helpful, but you're in the right place, these kind of classes. And, the other thing I'll say is teachings are really personal. So, every teacher is not for everybody. Everyone's style doesn't necessarily fit your personality, your intellectual predispositions, things like that. So don't be afraid, if I'm not your cup of tea, there's so many other teachers. And actually, the center has just a huge roster of many different amazing teachers, longtime practitioners, and, coming from a similar perspective, but uniquely to them. And so never be afraid to like try someone else, but it's good that you're here. And I'm sorry to hear that you're going through a challenging time. And it's
we're on the outside really of it now. I've been here in this it's like an outpatient type program, and it's really classes that we take, but they do a lot of mindfulness, which is good.
Oh yeah, it's really good. It's being your own therapist, right? It's like learning your own mind. What sets me off? So we have all these different mental afflictions, but we tend to specialize in a couple of them, right? So, there's people who are specialize in the anger, and there's people who specialize in attachment. That tends to be more my direction, and then, Michael talks about addiction. It's like, that's a flavor of all of that, right? Like we're all addicts in one sense or another, or we wouldn't be here. Right. So we're addicted to samsara. We're addicted to the things that kind of keep us in this suffering realm. So recognizing that it's a great equalizer, we're all in it together. And, hopefully with these classes, we'll get out together as well. So, yeah, I appreciate that. And then, going through changing of relationships, that's what divorce is. When we talk about suffering, Lord Buddha taught, the very first truth that he taught of the Four Noble Truths. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but the first thing he taught was the truth of suffering. And there's different kinds of suffering. There's the suffering that we immediately recognize as suffering. It's, I don't like this. That's obvious suffering. But then there's two other kinds of suffering that are more subtle. And, one is just the fact that we are in a realm where we're eligible for that kind of suffering at any time. So, just having to be reborn, having to have a kind of existence that is eligible for suffering is in itself a kind of suffering. They call that pervasive suffering. And then the other suffering is, I'll joke and say it's what we normally call happiness. And why it's suffering is because it doesn't last. Whatever it is that we're doing or enjoying that's giving us pleasure, the moment that it comes about, the end of it is already part and parcel with it, right? So whether it's a relationship, there is no relationship in this realm that isn't going to end. Every single one of them, either they will be, ripped from us through death or something else, or in the end, we will pass and be, taken away from all of our loved ones. So that impermanence, that the suffering of change is what that's called. And we're all there all the time. And, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, there's actually a book called Transforming Problems into Happiness. And when you're going through a challenging time, or when you're, just coming out of a challenging time, maybe when you have some of that mental space to kind of breathe and take stock, looking back and thinking, there is a practice where looking at that, it's a reality. So most of the time we're hiding from those facts. Most of the time we talk about impermanence in the context of a Dharma class, but in our life, we behave and we think, without not consciously thinking, but innately, kind of, it feels innate. I have to be careful when I use these words in a Buddhist class because they could have very specific meaning. But we have this uncontrived just feeling of this is going to last forever. And the proof is that we're so kind of shocked and disappointed when it doesn't. That's one way to know, like, oh, yeah, I thought this was going to last forever. And so just kind of sitting with that truth, which is it's not a good feeling, but it's a true feeling. It's the truth of your own suffering, and being gentle with yourself. And then, looking at like, how did this feel? And knowing it's going to happen again in myriad different ways. But then how can I use this to connect with or to be there to help others? How can I what have I learned about myself through the process? Can I try to remember this? The next time, whether it's the next time I fall in love or the next time I get a job, or, whatever it is that is making me happy that then changes. When it changes, to kind of sit in that and recognize the truth of it, and developing some self-compassion, and then hopefully extending that beyond ourselves, thinking about, wow, this is what everyone feels, on all the, the 364 other days of the year when I was happy, there were countless beings who were feeling what I'm feeling right now, or worse. And I think from that, developing that compassion really gives us grounds for a great deal of joy. Like that's a really good, positive feeling. And then we've taken our suffering and we've actually used it to do something with our minds. Sorry.
How do you develop self-compassion though?
Well, I think understanding what our situation is, I think anyone who understands the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha, if we have compassion to the extent that we feel like we have compassion for others, think about that. If we don't really have an understanding of suffering, then how can we really be compassionate? And of all the suffering in the world, the only suffering that we're intimately aware of, experientially, really, truly in touch with, is our own. And so, in a sense, you could say compassion has to really start with ourselves. Not in some clinging to our ego, self-existent ideas, but in that very gentle awareness that I am just like every other living being. And we all want to be happy. You know, it's why we do every single thing we do. I mean, that is the truth. And then, but unfortunately, what we do, it isn't always bringing us the causes of happiness. And that's where Dharma comes in, right? Because we're always doing what we think is going to make us happy. All beings are doing. By the way, everyone is doing what they think is going to make them happy. Maybe it's an unexamined thinking, you know, kind of on autopilot, but we're all following a trajectory that we think is going to end in some kind of happiness. And then how sad is it? You know, of course, we should be able to have compassion, because it is just out of ignorance that while we're in the pursuit of what's going to make us happy, we're actually creating the causes for, you know, a great deal of suffering for ourselves and for others. And so Buddhist teachings are really about what are the things that are, there's so many ways you can boil down Lord Buddha's teachings, but one of the ways is, what are the causes of happiness and what are the causes of suffering? And, you know, taking up one and giving up the other. So a lot of times, and, you know, kind of bringing me back around to like this idea of vows, you know, a lot of times when we hear vows or precepts, it can conjure up like a feeling of like rules and something rigid and like kind of imprisoned and like, you know, taking something away from ourselves. And actually, what the vows are for is to empower us, to actually help us to do the things that are going to get us what we actually want. Because it's like we've been connecting the wrong dots, right? Cause and effect. We all talk about karma and we have a sense of what that means, right? Doing something positive will end with something positive. And that's true. But it's deeper than that. And it's more subtle than that, right? And then as you study Buddhist classes, you know, and again, Buddhism doesn't have a corner on all of these ideas, but in my mind, you know, a complete path that's been laid out, which I find super helpful. But karma is much more subtle than just, you know, do a good thing, get a good result, because there's other things that go into it. So if you study, you'll learn, you know, there's what is my motivation, right? So I can do an act that looks like a good, like if there was such a thing as objectivity, something would look like objectively good, right? I go and I help a sick person. That's a good, looks objectively like a good act. Only I know my motivation. So maybe my motivation is that I want to get this person to be beholden to me, to kind of owe me something, or I want to look good for others. So our actions, that it's a good deed that we've done, but it's complicated, right? It's tied up with all these kind of unhealthy things as well. So back to mindfulness, it's sort of decoupling, not judging ourselves, not like, oh, I'm a terrible person. Even the good things I do are motivated by garbage. You know, the more we look, the more we're going to find that's the truth. But it's the truth for all of us. And the fact that we're looking is something to be really happy about, not hard on ourselves. And then starting to decouple those unhealthy behaviors and unhealthy motivations, unhelpful motivations. And then, you know, maybe even doing less what look like good deeds, but doing them from a place that's happy to do them. And, you know, happy while you're doing it, happy afterwards. And then later dedicating that, like, okay, I'm learning something about myself. So that's a big, long-winded answer about how to be more compassionate. But I think just understanding that we're not alone. And if we're learning to be more compassionate, it has to start with us. Like, you're the only person who knows the intimate story of your life and every struggle, right? Everything else is just a story. you know, a story about other people or a story about the world. The only suffering that we really know is our own. And that is not to be self-centered. It's just to like look at and allow ourselves to feel that, and allow ourselves to feel, wow, you know, Bonnie has really screwed up. She wanted to be happy. She's done all these things in the pursuit of that. She's made a mess of some things, you know. There are things that she's done that I'm happy for and I rejoice in. And then there's things that were mistakes. And then really, you know, from a Buddhist perspective, there's not like guilt. This concept of guilt really doesn't exist. It's the feeling for the negative things we've done, the negative patterns that we have, the negative way we think, is more regret, which is the same kind of feeling. Like imagine, you know, if you ate something that was poison, you wouldn't say, oh, well, you know, you might for a second, oh, I'm an idiot, I can't believe I did that. But really, the focus would be, what do I do about it? You know, like, this is not a time for judgment, it's a time for action. So I did something, I regret it. Now what can I do to fix it? And that's it. Not more than that. And I think, and I don't know if it's a phenomenon of the West or just people in general, but I think we struggle with that. I will tell you that the first few times I did purification practices, I was purifying the same thing every time. Like, and I don't know, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, but it says something about my not willing to let myself off the hook. Like to say, okay, you know, I did something to make up for this. I regret doing this, and moving on. So I think it's something we have to work on. And that's where having a class like this, or just having Sangha in general, is so helpful. You know, other people who are actively in the trenches of life. And, you know, we're all there, but some people are, you know, maybe not tuned in, right? And so maybe they're not doing anything to get out of it or really get to know their mind. Maybe, you know, they're just on autopilot. But here we're trying together. And I think that's really helpful. And then, you know, and then meeting great Dharma friends who will talk about what's happening in their life, and, you know, things that have been challenging that they've been able to overcome. I'll pause and see if anybody wants to chime in, debate, switch gears, anything? Comment?
I just want to say thank you so much for bringing up the in the trenches and the Dharma friends. I think it's so important for me that I've actually, since the pandemic started and Zoom, I resisted Zoom. I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I did it. And I met these great people, and they've been like now almost 3 years, real friends. Some of them I have their real phone numbers, their real addresses. We talk on the phone and this and that. And it's wonderful. The Sangha part has really expanded for me in these past years. And I anyway, and you're part of that. I wouldn't have met you had not I been on the Zoom thing, because I never go to this thing in person, even if it were, you know, not a pandemic. Anyway, so yeah, thanks.
Oh no, you're so welcome. Yeah, I mean, I feel it for me. Sangha is really important. So I don't know, anybody else want to comment, or, because here we are. So if it's okay, then I'm just going to talk a little bit about refuge, because it's a new year. And, you know, I thought people are making all kinds of resolutions and things like that. And I don't know if everybody on the call has taken refuge vows. I don't know if you're even interested in that, but I thought to talk a little bit about what it is and why a person would take refuge. So when we say, which I didn't do at the beginning of this because it's a introductory course. So I like to, you know, save the prayers maybe for other courses, but who, you know, we may decide towards the end we'll start doing prayers. We only have 4 weeks, but I like to have kind of a little bit freer because people are coming in from, I don't know what kind of backgrounds, and I don't know what their comfort level is. And it, it's another reason why I'm like, oh, should I talk about refuge? But I think it's important. So when we go for refuge, what that means is basically when the poop hits the fan, what do I think is going to help ultimately, right? So, we have ordinary refuge all the time. We take refuge in money. We take refuge in relationships. We take refuge in our friendships. And those are not all bad things. I guess it depends on, the degree to which we are doing it. But ultimately, when times are really tough, what is going to help? What do we think is going to help? And this is where, I don't like to use the F word, especially in beginning classes. I bristle against it, but I'll just say faith. I don't know what you thought I was going to say, but faith can be hard. For me, when I first met the Dharma, what I liked about it was I felt like I didn't have to swallow some dogmatic pill. I didn't have to sign up for anything. It was really kind of like, see what helps. And it all made sense to me. So it resonated. But refuge involves some amount of faith. It's faith that there's something and someone that can actually help ultimately all of our problems. And that would be, the Buddha, which is the enlightened mind. So I guess I'll say, it's important to think going for refuge to the Buddha. It is going for refuge to the person of Gautama, the Buddha who came to this earth. It is that. Depending on our view, it can be going for refuge to our teachers who we may see as a Buddha. And if we see them that way, they can function for us that way as well. But really, it's about the qualities of a Buddha. It's about the enlightened mind. So this idea that someone, again, going back to the Four Noble Truths, the things that he taught were things that he experienced. The truth of suffering, that there could be a cessation of suffering, the causes of suffering, that it could be stopped, and then how to actually do that, the path. So taking refuge in the Buddha is taking refuge in that enlightened mind and those qualities, the things that the Buddha learned himself, and taught to others. And then, the Dharma. So when we take refuge in 3 jewels. So you all probably know this, but I'll just rattle it off, because if you didn't, then you'll know something new. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. You probably already have heard all that. So, Buddha's obvious, but again, stressing that it's the enlightened mind more than it is a person. And that's important because that means it's something that we can also achieve in ourselves, right? So there's even a thing going for result refuge, which is going for refuge to our future enlightened selves, which is challenging for a lot of people to recognize that they have that potential, truly. So refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dharma, which we think of as, these teachings, whether it's books or, video, like the collection of Buddhist thought, but that's really kind of the nominal Dharma. The real Dharma is realizations in people's minds. So it's the cessation of anger, accomplishing true patience, right? Achieving bodhicitta, great compassion. Those are the kinds of things. That's what we're going for refuge in. We're saying those things will help. If I understand reality, if I have a direct perception of emptiness, if I have compassion for all living beings, if I develop renunciation, where I'm not focused on the mundane things in this world, these are things that are going to help me, and they can help all other living beings as well. So that's Dharma. And then Sangha, similarly, it's can be thought of as any ordained people, just the community of practitioners. So this group, all of us here right now, are a sangha. But ultimately, again, it's those people who have those realizations in their minds. And when we go for refuge, that's the ultimate sangha that we're going for refuge to. And it's helpful for us to take vows, because when you take vows, they say, we're not necessarily consciously going for refuge 24/7. It's sort of like if you develop bodhicitta, you're like imbued with this like uncontrived great compassion, but you're not necessarily having, well, I shouldn't say that, but conscious thought about going for refuge. If you have the vows, it's always there, always in your mind. So there's just the power of taking vows. So I thought, maybe to kind of share, I don't know, again, if you've taken vows, if people have an interest in that, but I thought to talk about, what it is, and then kind of how those vows function, what it looks like. So when we take refuge, we're really just committing ourselves to turning to those resources in times of trouble. So I'll stop there, and I don't know if anybody has any questions about refuge or vows, or why you might want to do that or not want to do that. Or can you kind of see how or why it might be helpful? I mean, the thing is, when you take vows, you see yourself taking the vows. So it's planting like a really virtuous seed.
Well, I think when you take the vows, it doesn't just plant the seeds. Kind of like you were saying, and I was kind of laughing that the first few times you did meditation, you found yourself kind of looking for refuge from doing the same thing over and over again, right? I was laughing because I thought it only took you a few times. That's really good, Bonnie, because I've been doing it for a year and a half, and I still find myself doing the same things, right?
Yeah.
But it reminds me of, okay, great. This is why you're doing it. You really have a choice here. You can set a new direction. Just because this is the direction you ended up at, this where you ended up here this morning because of the direction that you thought you were choosing, but it ended up getting you right back to the same place. You can start a new direction now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another really powerful thing, is just our ability to purify things, to kind of, even if it takes some of us, like me, more than one try, multiple times. But just this feeling like, hey, nothing is really that bad, and when you start studying like vows and Buddhist morality, I've said this before, and I think every time I say Buddhist morality, I have to say what I love about it is it's not arbitrary and it's not judgmental. It's really functional. It's like, what is going to work for us? So when you start looking at Buddhist morality and you start looking at different vows, there's 18 root vows for bodhisattva vows and like 46 secondary vows. And you can get really tied up in a knot. But the good news is, when you start looking at how you would have to break like a root vow, it has to be with so much like intention and duration. And you have to even be glad that you did it afterwards. So just the very fact that we regret things. Again, when and if you study karma deeply, one of the great things, one of the tools of purification is just having regret. So, I mean, just to know that you plant a seed, we plant countless seeds every day with everything we say, everything we think, everything we do, positive and negative. We are planting seeds that will absolutely ripen. Now, if we do something like, if we regret afterwards, both are good and bad. And this is the thing with karma, it works both ways. if I do something good, I'm generous. And then 10 minutes later, I'm like, I wish I didn't do that for that person. I still did a good thing. It's still going to have a result, a mostly positive result, but it's going to have a weaker result because I've sort of peed all over it, right? Where conversely, if I am happy that I did it, it's almost like I did it twice. You know, it's like adding power, adding some kind of fertilizer to what I just did. And again, good and bad, both of those things are true. So it's just powerful to know that we can set a new pattern and actively be kind of like cultivating, you know, the garden of our lives, right? Like I've been like a crazy blind architect building my world without knowing what the heck I was doing. And, you know, it's not so bad actually, you know, but imagine what we could do when we have intention and we have some wisdom and we have, you know, knowing here's the things to do, here's the things to not do. And so much of it isn't rocket science. But so every day we're not killing people every single day. I hope that I'm pretty positive that it's true for all of us. We are not killing people every day. So this is a nice thing. Like you have vows and you don't kill people, you kind of get credit for keeping the vow of not killing people every single day. So you've done something every day. We've done something positive by not killing people. Something to be glad about. And maybe that sounds flippant, but because we have killed before. You know, if you believe in countless lifetimes. And by the way, you can put those things on the back burner. So another thing I love about Buddhism, if there were no future lives and you were just here, it would be, I think, beneficial. It could benefit you. Not a ton, but it's helpful in your just ordinary life. However, so you don't have to buy into that. But I would say don't just discount the idea of past and future lives. You know, from a Buddhist perspective, you don't have to believe everything, but just maybe, you know, take with a grain of salt, like, okay, others who have basically been you know, psychonauts, you could call them, you know, people who have done mind exploration. You know, they went, you know, Buddhas did these things, and many enlightened beings, many of our lineage teachers, you know, tried these methods and they accomplished some kind of results that they're coming back and reporting to us on. So I don't have those realizations and I haven't had those direct experiences, but I could say, hey, most of what they've taught me has been helpful. It's logical. It seems to make sense. It resonates with me. And so I'm not going to make up my mind about past and future lives now. I'll put it on the back burner. So things like karma, I think the idea of karma does resonate with people. But then you get weird things like where it's just like The Secret, almost like wishful thinking. Hey, if we just wanted to be rich and it was just wishing it could manifest it, we'd all be billionaires. I mean, and I don't mean any disrespect. I think there's something there, but it obviously requires more. It's helpful. It's helpful. It's helpful. But again, you know.
No, it isn't. It's a fucking joke. I got this because it's a pretty book. It has very high production values. It was a very expensive book. It's a joke. It's a fucking joke. Here it is, The Secret. Okay, go on. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. You know, I mean, the secret is that the secret is there's more to the secret than the secret. And so that's, you know, part of why to be here. They're onto something though, right? And I think it's interesting that we live in a time where these kinds of things are coming out because they touch on something that's true, but it's incomplete. It's immature, not fully hatched, right? Onto something, but not fully hatched. But even that, you know, I like to be respectful of what helps people, but I would say again, we've been trying that. You know, we've wished for all kinds of things, right? And I could just sit here and hold something and like wish it in to become a bar of gold, and it's just not going to happen. So yeah, so we need methods, I think, that are a little more practical than that, and methods that if we do them, so it, you know, if we do certain things, what will I get the result that Buddha says I'll get? And you know, I would say to the extent that I have practiced, I have gotten the results. And to the extent that I haven't gotten the results, I'm going to tell you, it's because I didn't practice, because I haven't really practiced. You know, I have a good Dharma friend, and he used to come to me like in a perpetual, like deep, deep suffering. And, you know, I would share just some teachings, and, you know, these practices should help, and they didn't help. And it, you know, over a long period of time. And I just said to him, just plainly, I love you. You didn't do it. You're not, there's no way you're not doing the practice. And that's not to be harsh, but it's just, and even sometimes we don't know that we're not doing it. I think I shared with some people in this group, I had an issue at one point in my life where I was doing what's known as the 4 powers. So these are the 4 things that you do to exhaust a negative karma. Like I said, one of them, the first one is regret. And so you can do it on a negative action that you know you've done, that you want to purify. But sometimes you don't know what you did. You just know you're experiencing a yucky result. So you don't know exactly how you caused it necessarily. You don't know in this life, it may not be very obvious, right? So somebody doesn't like me and they're thwarting my efforts at every turn. It looks like to me in this life, I've been nothing but nice to that person. So I don't see an obvious cause for this situation. So, but I can purify, I can do 4 powers to change that situation. And it isn't necessarily instant. And sometimes, you know, actually changing the situation, what I should say is to ripen that karma. So sometimes ripening it is still not going to feel very good. If I've done something really bad, when it ripens, it, you know, instead of maybe ripening as being murdered, you know, I'll get a headache, that kind of a thing, right? So ripening in a lesser way. But I've shared with this group that I had this person who was thwarting me, and I didn't know, you know, why is this happening? And I was doing 4 powers, right? So I would go for refuge, I would regret, I would do a remedy for it and resolve to not do it, whatever caused it again. But the problem was, because in this life, I didn't really feel like I had done anything to cause it. So how much I was able to regret what I did to cause it was very limited. So I was really kind of saying the words like, okay, I regret whatever I did that caused this situation. But my heart, I wasn't really feeling regret. Does that make sense? Because I'm like, oh, I don't know what I did. And I was talking to Venerable Rabina, those of you who have taken a course with her. She's a real straight shooter, to say the least. And she's like, darling, are you doing 4 powers? And I'm like, of course, I'm a know-it-all. So yeah, of course I'm doing the 4 powers. Like, I know. Tell me something else I need to do. And she's like, are you regretting it? And when I thought about it, I really wasn't regretting it, because I really didn't connect anything in my behavior with what was happening to me. So I had to go really back to basic and just say that just the fact that I'm, take care. Just the fact that I'm experiencing this, I must have created the causes. And I don't know what it is, but what do I know? I do know that I have been divisive in this life, you know, not necessarily with this person, but I've certainly been divisive. I've certainly been an obstacle to other people accomplishing things that they wanted to accomplish. And those are just the things that I can be aware of. So they, not with this person, but in general, this was true. And so when I will say, when I sincerely did practice and did regret, it did change the situation. Now, I would say, even if it didn't change the outward situation, I could still say those methods were really helpful for me because they changed my inner situation. So, I mean, that's kind of, with Dharma antidotes, with the methods, to the extent that we practice them, they work because they work on our own minds, right? They're not dependent on some external anything, not dependent on someone else, not dependent on anything, just my own mind. And then obviously having a teacher, having the teachings, and then having a community of people to support. Like those are the things that are helpful. They're supportive. So it's those things together. But aside from that, we really can become our own therapists. We really can make peace with ourselves, be compassionate with ourselves, be compassionate with others. We can break addictive behaviors, recognizing that we're all addicts of some sort, right? So addicted to hearing nice things, being liked, getting what I want, all of those, crazy things, right? So one of the nice things about going through a rough patch and having maybe some of that obvious suffering is it wakes us up to the reality of our situation every day, that sometimes we can ignore, but it's ever present. So long as we're here, that suffering is ever present. I know that cheers you up, doesn't it, Michael? So, yeah, smiling like, oh yeah, thanks for that, Vaughn. So I feel like I've talked a lot. I just want to pause and give folks a minute. I don't know if anyone wants to add something, and you can certainly disagree or say, oh, that doesn't ring true for me, or I don't know. Discussion is open. I think that's another nice thing about a class like this. If you go, if it's Lama Zopa Rinpoche or, any High Lama, you go to see His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, there's opportunity often for questions, but truthfully, it's a lot harder, right? We're more like just receiving. In this kind of context, like I'm just like you, I'm a person on the path. We can talk about it and, we can question it and openly and happily. So if nobody has anything, then kind of along the lines of one of the things we do to ripen the good karma, or to kind of protect those seeds and plant them firmly and put fertilizer on them, is to just be happy about them, rejoicing. So I would love to take a couple minutes again, on the front end, thought about why we're here. And to the extent that you can really connect with the highest reason, and it's okay if it's just peace of mind. But, if there's a little Jiminy Cricket in the back of your mind that says, I would love to help every living being, but I know I'm just a piece of crap who can't do it. But there's still a little voice that says, but maybe you could. And I'd like to, if I could, if I thought I could, kind of maybe feel free to just let yourself have the wish. And so reconnect with the reason you're here tonight. And to the extent that you can have like that highest wish, try to connect with that. And then think about the time that you sat here listening to me, blah, blah, blah. Like you did it for a purpose. And so let's dedicate our time together towards that highest purpose. That we can tame our own minds and hearts. And then from that perspective, really be able to be there to help others. And then with some gratitude towards those beings, those teachers who have helped us along the path. And may they all have long and healthy lives and continue to help. And our Dharma friends, may they also have long, healthy lives. And may we all accomplish our highest goals together. And thank you so much. And I welcome, if something, maybe give some thought between now and next week. And if something comes to mind that you'd like to talk about, can be super specific or real general, hypothetical, whatever. This is really your time. It's our time together to just grapple with whatever's coming up for us. So thank you. I appreciate everyone so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
I
you.
salute you.
Thank you. Nice meeting you guys.